And welcome back to another episode of Salmon's Pizzeria. Today we have the latest roundup from the Scottish Premiership and Scottish League Cup semi-finals. I'm joined by two fine guests, our Hearts man, Scott McIntosh. How are you, Scott?
Yeah, very well. Thanks for having me on, Alex.
As always, a pleasure for us. And Jenna, not such a great weekend for you, but I'm sure we'll get into that in a bit. Um,
Have to.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so we will start at the top of the Premiership, or the most goals, anyways, with Dundee and Kilmarnock. We'll just get into the thick of it. A marvelous comeback from Dundee, who have completely reversed what happened to them not so long ago. Scott, impressive start by Kilmarnock, but despite kind of finding their feet now in the league, they couldn't finish the job off.
Yeah, very unlike Kilmarnock to sort of let a lead like that slide, given what Derek McInnes has been quite able and adept at doing, both with Aberdeen and Kilmarnock, in terms of seeing out away matches when there've even just been a goal up. So that was a little bit of a surprise. Not a huge shock to see Dundee conceding more goals. They've been leaking goals even at the start of the season when they had a relatively decent start in front of goal. They were still having to score two or three just to get a point or win. So that sort of trend seems to be continuing, but a great comeback.
Yeah, and Jenna, we know a few folk who have been questioning Tony Dock probably right up until half time. But do you think this is maybe a kind of turning point for Dundee? Because it's a good result against a team who seem to have found their feet. Kilmarnock having beaten Rangers and then kind of just continuing to kick on. I think they probably thought that the game was won after the two goals and a huge mistake by John McCracken. But yeah, do you think that's kind of food for thought for Dundee fans?
No, definitely. I mean, I've said kind of a few times on the show now that like Dundee, Kilmarnock, and Dundee United as well. Like they're quite weird teams to watch because in some games you'll watch them and think this is absolutely woeful. What on earth are the managers thinking? And you'll get a game like that, you think, oh, actually these teams are actually not bad to watch. Where has this performance came from? I think it should appease fans for now, but I think they need to get more consistent with the wins. If they get about 3 or 4, maybe next couple of games, then I think that should appease things. But you know yourself, Scottish football's quite a weird one at times. You can see teams that are losing, but actually are playing good football, or on the flip side, teams that are playing absolutely horrendous football and are also not winning. So it's just one of those ones you kind of need to take it as it comes. But I think he's did well for himself. I mean, as you said, going from 2-0 down to winning 3-2, that's not easy to do.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, Scott, probably quite a sore one for Kilmarnock because they went up and did exactly that not so long ago. They now have to be on the have a taste of their own medicine. But it starts so well. A huge mistake from John McCracken, and I think recent form has kind of seen exactly why he's not third choice goalkeeper in the recent Scotland squads.
Yeah, I always felt that was a bit of a strange selection when it did happen. He's not someone who's overly convinced me over the last sort of 12, 18 months. I think that's been Dundee's Achilles heel. Even when they were doing really well last season, it was off the back of being a really interesting team to watch from the middle upwards. They had a poor defensive record last season, and it's not really an area of the park that seems to have been fixed. They've obviously tried to bring in slightly different personnel, but there still seems to be the same sort of problems there. So again, it's not a huge shock to see them conceding those types of goals. And again, against a team like Kilmarnock, who are all about being very physical, being very aggressive, then I think it's quite easy for teams like Dundee to concede goals to them because of that style of play.
Yeah, absolutely, and it was bedlam in the end, Jenna, because not only was it a huge turnaround, but it was also a 94th minute winner from Larkesh. Dundee seemed to kind of have a thing for left backs, don't they? They had Owen Beck, and now Larkesh seems to be coming onto some form as well.
Definitely, the goal was absolutely phenomenal. Nice little cheeky slide into the box. You can't really argue with that. 94th minute winner is everything that you want as a fan to see, and he's nailed it. And it's not very often that you see left back scoring an amazing goal, especially one like that. So I mean, fair play at the way it was an absolute crack, and he scored.
Absolutely, yeah, and we will move on from that one then to a positive result for a team from Edinburgh. Scott, St Johnstone 1, Hearts 2. How do you think you've fared so far under Neil Critchley? Because it's been a mostly positive start.
Yeah, I think the most encouraging thing for me is that there's been continuity in terms of, first of all, team selection. That was a big issue that we had. Stephen Naismith started to second guess himself quite a lot in the last few weeks of his reign, and I think one of the things that Critchley's done is that I think he's identified with us having 2 games a week pretty much up until the end of the calendar year. I think he's identified the fact that he's not going to get as many days in the training sessions as he would have wanted to. So I think he's tried to keep it quite basic. We're pretty much sort of 4-2-4, 4-4-2 predominantly most weeks. And I think again, the style he plays pretty much all about a bit of a high press and try to be quite aggressive and getting the balls out wide as quickly as possible. So I think regardless of the results that have been a little bit patchy over the last 3 games, I think what should encourage fans is that there has been a bit of continuity and there seems to be a buy-in from most of the players from what we can see as well.
Yeah, Jenna, Nicky Clark has had all the headlines. He begins by becoming the new St Johnstone captain, and then he decides to go and score. Unfortunately for him, it was for Hearts. He then gets the leveller. So, how do you think that kind of will impact him going forward? Because obviously he's just been given the armband, and in his first game after doing so, he puts the ball in the wrong net.
It's quite a hard one. I mean, taking the band is quite a big step up for any player, regardless of tenure and experience. I hope it doesn't bog him down too much, just because it is such an honour, and that going wrong in your first game, it probably is going to put some doubts in your head of, am I good enough for this? But to be honest, I think he had a good game. Other than that, I mean, the goal, I watched the back, and when I was watching, I was sat thinking to myself that there's no way this has been given to Blair Spittle for the goal. It's definitely an office in Johnston. I never realised it was him, unfortunately, but it's just one of those things. I think you need to just take it on the chin, just try and move on from it best you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Scott, you kind of touched on it there with squad selections from Stephen Naismith, but another thing which seemed to be not really going Hearts' way was the substitutions as well, and it's a substitution in Kenneth Vargas that gets the winner. Somebody who's probably had a slower start to the season than hoped.
Yeah, he's probably been overplayed because he's really the only player we've got in the final third that has any sort of pace. We've had to pretty much play him week in, week out, and sometimes twice a week. You then throw in the lengthy flights that he's had going back to Costa Rica on a couple of international breaks as well. And you could see it against Kilmarnock last week. He looked really leggy, and it did look like he needed a rest. And it's worked for us. I think one of the things that worked quite well for us on Saturday was that his introduction allowed us to push St Johnstone back. What they done quite well after half time was that their 2 centre halves actually moved up the park and about good sort of 5-10 yards from where they were starting the first half. And they were in the ascendancy up to the point in which they got that goal. But having Vargas on allowed us to sort of switch back on a little bit. And after we scored, we used him as a good outlet to just sort of, play balls down the channels and turn their centre half. So it was a really good substitution, not just for his goal, but the contribution afterwards as well.
Yeah, and just to stick with you, Scott, Craig Gordon. We've already talked about John McCracken not getting a call up to the Scotland squad, but Craig Gordon has, and presumably will be the main goalkeeper for this camp. Not too many foot wrong this season, and only conceding a penalty on the day. But were you impressed with his display? And do you think, a man of obviously his calibre, but his age as well, should be Scotland's number one goalkeeper?
I think it is a concern. It's the reason I say that is that up until about 2 months ago, it'd been quite apparent that both Stephen Naismith and Stephen Clark didn't see him as their number one. Now, I think through a mixture of poor form in others and injury to others, he is now being relied upon. He's been fine over the last few weeks. I would say that Hearts have kept the number of chances that we've gave away down to a sort of premium. So he's not really been called into action that often. So it's really hard to tell just how much of his reflexes he still has. And I think that is going to be a sort of game to game scenario you're going to have to sort of judge that on. So I do think Scotland, they really do need to be looking for another alternative. I'm not overly sold on Angus Gunn either, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, I think that should be worrying for Scotland and Hearts that they're still having to rely on him so much at this stage, even although he's, like I say, he's been fine. But yeah, there has been times where communication between him and the centre halves haven't quite been there, unfortunately.
Someone, Jenna, who who has really been probably the star of the show so far for Hearts this season, even when things weren't going so well. Benny Beningame has a huge say in the game with a superb piece of skill and just technical ability in the build up to the second goal. But how important is that kind of continuity that Scott was talking about to Hearts' side, and how important is Benny Beningame?
Oh, he'll be massive for Hearts. They are in a really important transformation period now as well. Obviously, changing from managers, the poor run of results. He will be key to the rebuild, I think, to be honest, if you want to call it a rebuild as such, and trying to reshape what Hearts has been like. It must be an exciting time to try and watch that go down. I mean, I know that new manager bounce, it doesn't just impact the players on the pitch, it also impacts the fans as well. A little bit of excitement of trying to see what works, what doesn't. As you said, he is an unreal player and he's finally getting the chance to show what he's capable of because the tactics and whatnot have changed with the new manager coming in.
Yeah, of course, and just to go back to you, Scott, and we'll go to the other side of it. Valakari has started quite strongly as St Johnstone manager, but that is back to back defeats. It's a team which were most people's favourites to go down, and both of the Edinburgh clubs have shocked so far for all the wrong reasons. But do you think that they could still find themselves at the kind of the foot end of the table?
Yeah, I think they still will, but I think it'll be less about the manager now and just more about the overall quality of the squad. I think if Craig Levein had stayed, I think they would have been definitely heavily backed to have went down because I don't think he was capable of getting much out of that group of players. I think with Valakari, one of the things that I've quite liked seeing for St Johnstone over the last 2 or 3 matches is that they're quite intent on building from the back, and they go narrow in midfield, which obviously allows a lot of opportunities to press them in wide areas like we done in the first half on Saturday. But I do think there is a risk and reward strategy that he's trying to go for. I think he understands that there is going to be periods of the game where they're going to, maybe get turned over in transition because they maybe don't quite have the athleticism and the physicality in defence and midfield that they need to sort of deal with those quick turnarounds. But I've been quite impressed with what I've seen with them. I thought they played really well for a good 20-minute spell in the second half up until they scored. And you can see what he's trying to do. Now, obviously, he'll need to bring in his own personnel to try and shape that and try to cement that process. But I think St Johnstone fans should be encouraged by what they've seen. But I think what they need to accept is that although I think that'll get them more reward in some of the games against, teams that are round about them in that bottom six, I do think they're going to allow themselves to be a bit more open in matches against other sides. And I do think it's about getting that balance between getting the reward of getting points against the bottom teams, but also accepting that it might leave them susceptible to a couple of thrashings later on in the season as well.
Absolutely, and from one Edinburgh side to the other, Jenna, Hibs just can't buy a win at the moment, and they draw 1-1 with Dundee United. Another late goal. How much longer does David Gray have as the manager?
Short answer, not long. It's getting quite serious, to be honest, at Hibs. I feel bad for the guy because at this point it seems to be the same thing every season that it gets spoken about with Hibs. Results are going bad, bring in a new manager 6 months later, results are bad, new manager. They can't keep chopping and changing like this. They're lacking a complete sense of stability in all levels of the field, and it's getting beyond a joke at this point. I'm not a Hibs fan myself, but see if I was, I would be ripping my hair out because it's just not sustainable. They can't keep doing it. It's not good for the players. It's not good for the club itself. It's certainly not good for the fans either. If they do depart with them, fair enough. Justify the results aren't there. You can only give someone so much time. But I think Hibs, they need to seriously look in the mirror and go, fundamentally, what is wrong with this club?
Yeah, and Scott, it's probably good to be off the bottom of the table. Hibs, yeah, they're struggling a little bit. And is David Gray got the capabilities to change that?
I think the Hearts, Hibs, and Aberdeen jobs are probably three of the hardest jobs you can get in this league, and I don't think they're conducive to bringing in rookie managers. Whether that's David Gray, whether it's Stephen Naismith, whether it's Barry Robson, I think we've now seen ample evidence of why it doesn't work. That's nothing against David Gray. I think he's trying to keep things quite simple in terms of how they play the game. I think they lack creativity. They had majority possession again yesterday, didn't really do a lot with it, but I think they've probably done enough to see out the win. Unfortunately, it was a ludicrous decision through VAR to give Dundee United that penalty, but I think going back to the original question around, whether David Gray's the right man, I think there's two reasons why Hibs shouldn't pull the trigger on him. I think firstly, you pull the trigger on him, you've still got the same people in charge, this golden quadrant, that are going to then make the decision to bring in the new manager. And based off of their previous selections, being Gray, Johnson, Montgomery, Maloney, there's really no faith in that team to make the right call. I think on top of that, you do create an environment where players start to think, well, he doesn't really fancy me, but I'll outlast him, because managers don't last here long. So I think you really have to try and reverse that trend. You really don't want an environment at a football club. You can see it. I think Man United are a good example of that. There's been quite a few players now that have stuck around Man United for year on year on year, have failed countless managers, and I think they just get into that habit of thinking, I've got a contract for 4 or 5 years that doesn't have that 3-month notice period that most managers have now. I know that if we go on a sticky runny 6 or 7 games, he'll go before I go. So I'll just outlast him. I won't give that extra 5-10% in games. So I think there is a bit of a cultural problem that Hibs try and need to sort. And I don't think getting rid of David Gray's the answer. It's not to say that they're not going to struggle with him, but I think they've got to give him a bit more time. It's not like they're cut adrift at the bottom. I think every team now in the bottom 3 or 4 know that you're only 1 or 2 wins from starting to challenge for the top 4 rather than the bottom 2 places. So I think Hibs fans need to be a little bit patient. I know that's hard to ask for, because again, they'll see that Hearts have made a change, and that can sometimes sort of amplify the noise that goes amongst rivals when they see that their neighbours have made that change and they're maybe wanting something similar. But again, you look at the evidence there's nothing to suggest that if David Gray went, that the right man would come along. And again, bringing somebody in mid-season is always difficult as well. January's never a good transfer window to make long-term sort of planning suggestions. So I think they need to stick with him. They've done enough to win yesterday, and again, albeit for a bad VAR decision, they would have got the 3 points.
Yeah, and Jenna, that seems to be, as Scott says, albeit the VAR decision maybe questionable, maybe more than questionable, but that seems to be the biggest sticking point with Hibs at the moment, is that they just can't see games out. Away to Dundee United, obviously they were ahead and somehow find a way to lose it. Even in the Edinburgh Derby, a late equaliser and then a late equaliser at the weekend against Dundee United. They just can't seem to see games out. Do you think that's a kind of mentality issue, or do you think they're running on empty?
I think it's probably a bit of both, to be honest. It's a bit like chicken and egg. What one came first? Did the mentality issue start first, or did they start losing steam first? You can't argue it. Do you know what I mean? Like, as Scott kind of hit it perfectly on the head. Like, the Hibs team now, I mean, I kind of said it there as well. It's just rinse and repeat the same old analysis of all their games. It's that, last minute equaliser within like last 10 minutes or something like that. Yeah, they did well, and there's always that but that lets them down. Hibs, I feel bad for the fans, because it must be frustrating, because it's beyond a joke at this point. They really need to get their heads in the game. Scott said it does seem as though there is a bit of a culture of, it doesn't matter, I've got this contract. Contracts can be terminated. It might cost them a fortune, but theoretically speaking, they can be. Managers can be terminated, players can be terminated. These players need to remember that, I think, because they're letting both the gaffer down and themselves. Because at the end of the day, you could have the best manager in the world at Hibs. If the players don't play for him, it's irrelevant, and vice versa. You can have the best players in the world. If your manager's not worth anything, it's not going to matter, because you won't get results regardless. It's just one of those things. Like the Hibs, you think, to be honest, they just need to rip the club to bits and start over again, but obviously you can't. That's the unfortunate thing.
Yeah, and I'm kind of on the other side of that, Scott. Probably another favourite to go, or to at least be near the bottom of the table, was Dundee United if Jim Goodwin stuck around. I'm sure it's pretty safe to say that there were more than a few Dundee United fans who were hoping they would start the season with somebody else at the helm. But they do sit fourth so far, and they have had quite a few impressive results. I think they've only lost 2 of their last 6, and it was to Motherwell and high-flying Aberdeen. So he's been pretty impressive. He seems to know how to put a team together in the Premiership for well, not the first time, but it certainly didn't work the last time.
I think I think Goodwin will do okay this season. I think Dundee United will accumulate enough points to see themselves maybe safe around sort of sixth, seventh, eighth position by the end of the season. I think the real challenge will be, can he then progress past that point? And it's a point in which he's reached that stage with St Mirren before, and then it's almost like he's got a bit of a ceiling as a manager. He doesn't quite know how to take charge of teams like Aberdeen, where you're expected to be the protagonist in most fixtures. I think Dundee United fans will be quite content with seeing them just consolidate their position this season. But I think the challenge will then be what happens next year, when a lot of fans will be expecting them to cement their place as a top six team. Because generally speaking, they've got every right to think that that's what they are, based on sort of club stature and sort of ambition of the club's board in the past and that. So I do not have concerns with Dundee United short term, but I do think that cycle that we've seen with managers doing okay for a year, but then struggling to sort of build on that, I do think Jim Goodwin will suffer from that eventually.
Absolutely, and we will move on to the final Premiership game of the weekend, which took place in Paisley. St Mirren 0, Ross County 0. Not one for the neutrals, but that did have its moments. We will start with you, Jenna, a goalkeeper who we've talked about, one who has missed out. We've talked about one who is in, another who missed out and probably should feel a little bit harshly done by is Ross Laidlaw. He started well for Ross County yet again, but just does not seem to be in Steve Clarke's plans whatsoever.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things to us. I don't mean any disrespect to Ross County when I say this, but yeah, he's had some good games, and to be honest, he had some brilliant saves in that game. I was watching back the highlights, but I don't see him making a Scotland squad while he's at Ross County. And again, I don't mean any disrespect to them at all in the slightest when I say this. But see if he was like playing for a team that are like maybe like challenging for Europe or had a little bit of experience, like Heartache, something like that, I'd see the argument then. But just because he's doing good domestically doesn't mean he'll do well. I mean, look at where we are in the Nations League today, playing against like players like Ronaldo. Do you really think a keeper from Ross County will be able to stand the test of that? And again, there's no disrespect meant by that. Great player, but I think that's a prospect for the future, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I've noted that one down the minute so that I can send that to Peter Mackay, our Ross County fan.
I know Scott's going to get clapped over if he ever does get a call up, and it'll just be that lassie for the pizza pods, let it
out. Scott, yeah, Ross Laidlaw misses out. We obviously talked about the other two, not such great form from McCracken, but some better form, and maybe a little bit worrying that Craig Gordon is in charge. You maybe don't expect Ross Laidlaw to be playing too many minutes, but surely he's within a shout.
I think there's always that issue around exposure for certain players when they play at certain clubs, and I think not just Ross Laidlaw, but I think fans. I think Lennon Miller's a great example that I'm sure Jenna can come up with.
Oh yeah.
Where I think if you're playing for a slightly different team, I would suggest that you're going to get more of a chance at international level in terms of being included in squads. So, yeah, I do think there's always an issue around exposure. I also think Steve Clarke's incredibly loyal to players, whether rightly or wrongly. And I think sometimes it's more to do with that rather than what he's not seeing in other people. Again, Lauren Shanklin's still in the squad, and you ask any Hearts fan just now, they would tell you that that's something that he does not need just now. He's someone who needs less exposure on the park and a bit more time to work on his sharpness and his fitness. So there's definitely a few examples of where that loyalty will go against some players and it'll work for others. And possibly that might be the case with Ross Laidlaw. He's had something of a checkered past as a goalkeeper. He was a number 2 at Hibs. Rafe Rovers, he done okay. I think he's someone who's going through a bit of a decent patch in form rather than being someone that I think you need to consider for international recognition. But again, that could just be because I'm not watching them nearly enough as well. So again, it goes back to that exposure argument. It could just be a case that the best people to make the judgment are the ones who are watching them week in, week out.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to kind of turn this into the Ross Laidlaw show, but I'll stick with you on this, Scott. An argument that I saw myself making several times when Benji Siegrist was doing so well at Dundee United, and why not to sign him for Rangers, was the fact that lesser teams in the league face more shots, and therefore goalkeepers have to make more saves. Obviously, this weekend, slightly different. He saves the penalty, but do you think that could be the case for Ross Laidlaw as well? Of course, he's going to have to make so many saves when his team faces so many shots.
I think the challenge comes when you sign for a bigger team around concentration. So players, goalkeepers, whoever it might be, they're more relied upon. They need to be switched on constantly. When in fact, what can catch them out when they sign for a bigger club is that they'll have long periods of the game where they're maybe not involved. And I think it probably impacts on sort of defenders and goalkeepers more than anyone. And I think that's where, someone could sign for a Rangers Celtic who's done well at another club. But again, because they're not needing to be relied upon that often, they might switch off, and that's when they lose that concentration and they start making those elementary mistakes.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we'll get into the game then. Obviously, a lot of focus on Ross Laidlaw because he does save a penalty. But yeah, a 0-0 draw, probably a decent point for Ross County. But were there any winners or losers in this one for you, Jenna?
It's kind of hard to be. I mean, watching back the highlights, both teams had some good attempts at goal, but I think both St Mirren and Ross County, they'll have good games, but especially more so St Mirren, they're just not clinical enough. I mean, don't get me wrong, St Mirren has their own issues in the background. That's probably going to play a part in it. Less said about that, probably the better. If you know, you know. If you don't, just Google it. You're not going to get cancelled for bringing that up, but it's just a hard time for the club now. St Mirren, I've got a bit of a soft spot for them just because of obviously Stephen Robinson and Keith Lasley being there, but it's not great now for St Mirren, but 3 points at the weekend would have been massive for them. Same with Ross County, to be fair, but I think out of the two teams, it was more so St Mirren that were desperately needing that win rather than County.
Yeah, and would you agree, Scott? Do you think St Mirren are kind of in the hunt for a win, and maybe this is an opportunity that's passed them by?
Yeah, I think so. I think where St Mirren struggle to some degree is that they don't really have a talisman that you can bank on 10, 15 goals a season. And that's always kind of went against them to a certain degree. They done really well last season. They managed to sort of share the goals around, sort of between 3 or 4 forwards, and then you've got others who'll maybe add in 1 or 2 from midfield, like a Mark O'Hara, and then you get your goals coming in for set plays as well. But I do think St Mirren, they're always going to struggle to pull themselves away from, say, 6th or 7th in the league, because they don't really have someone up front that you can sort of hang your hat on and say, they're going to get me those 10, 15 goals a season. That'll be the difference between, drawing a game at home against Ross County and winning one. So I think until they address that, they'll continue to have those issues. But again, I don't foresee them having too many problems either, because they're a well-drilled side. I think Robinson knows what he's doing. Again, similar to McInnes, he's very experienced in this league. And I can never really see Kilmarnock and St Mirren staying close to the bottom whilst they're still in charge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and they're part of that kind of 4-team pack on 12 points. I think both of them are actually, but both of them will probably have top 6 ambitions. Ross County and Don Cowie are looking to kind of build on something. But when I spoke to Peter at the start of the season, Jenna, his hopes and dreams relied on not another playoff, and he's kind of had enough of that heartache, not so much heartbreak in the end. But do you think that's what Ross County should be aiming towards? Because they seem to be building something together. I mean, the first team to beat Dundee this season, and then they've kind of kicked on from there. They were very unfortunate in Dingwall against Celtic. They've had some pretty close games, but do you think that is the aim for them, is just go, do you know what, let's stay up, but maybe stay up comfortable? Or is there a chance that, especially with the table so close, like Scott said, that they could be pushing for top 6 and maybe even a European place?
It's quite hard to tell. I mean, at the bare minimum, they have to try and avoid another playoff, because that'd be 3 years in a row they'd have been in that position. For a club like County, I know they're everyone's favourites to be at the minimum 10th or 11th for different reasons. That's fair enough. But if they really want to change things and give their fans something to root for, then aim for top 6. Absolutely. I mean, the way that this season's kind of been so far, on paper, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to do it. But again, County's just one of those sides, you always expect them to do bad. So when they do start doing well, it kind of makes you wait, hold on a minute, are they finally changing? And then same old happens. But I do hope that they actually do make something of themselves this season, just because it's a change. That's one thing I've been seeing quite a lot this season, is the difference in the teams and their performance. It's been kind of almost refreshing to watch. Aberdeen going on the run that they did, superb viewing again. It's good for Scottish football because too often you just hear about the two teams in particular, and maybe to an extent, likes of Hearts and Hibs. Usually bad stuff about Hibs and then great stuff about Hearts, but it's just something different. If we can get Ross County in top six in European football, what a story that is for Scottish football.
Yeah, and that's all the Premiership action from the weekend. Not much has changed in terms of the table. Celtic and Aberdeen obviously unbeaten, but they played in the Cup, as did Rangers, who sit third. Dundee United moved up to fourth, but have played a game more than Motherwell, who were our other Cup semi-finalist. Dundee finished the top six. I think it's then goes to St Mirren, Kilmarnock and Ross County, who are all on 12 points alongside Dundee. St Johnstone just escaping that bottom two on 10, while Hearts and Hibs fight it out. Hearts slightly ahead of Hibs, but Hibs do have a game in hand. We will move on from the league action to the League Cup action. Jenna will spare you for a little bit longer, and we will go to the Celtic Aberdeen game. An unbeaten Aberdeen who took a point at Celtic Park and then 3 against Rangers at Pittodrie. Everybody seems to think that second place is wrapped up for them, and they were probably going into this thinking they had a real shot at a cup final. Scott, how wrong they were.
Yeah, I've got a lot of sympathy for Jimmy Tilleen with regards to what happened on Saturday. And I think it actually strikes some similarities with what Brendan Rodgers had to try and explain himself out of after their away trip in Dortmund last month. I think if you're a manager who has a very strong philosophy on how you want your teams to play, and I think with Aberdeen, it does involve being quite brave in and out of possession. I think it can. I think what some managers think is that if they go against that philosophy and tell their players that they want them to try something different, does that make their players lose trust in them and vice versa? And I think Rodgers does that with Celtic to an extent in Europe. Now, as neutrals, we could watch that Aberdeen game on Saturday, and after 10, 15 minutes, you could probably say, this is a bit naive, it's been a bit reckless. I know Michael Stewart used the term brave. I would say it's more reckless than brave to do that against Celtic on a big wide open pitch like Hampden. But I do understand that ultimately, if what Jimmy Tilleen does gets buy-in from the Aberdeen fans, even when they lose a game as heavily as they did on Saturday, then that's the main priority. And it's the same with Celtic. It shouldn't really matter what the neutrals think. Ultimately, if Brendan Rodgers has a philosophy and if the fans and the players buy into that, then that's ultimately all that really matters. And I guess what Tilleen will be hoping is that if he sticks to that philosophy, it'll see more good days than bad days over the coming weeks and months. So I get why it could be viewed as a very naive strategy, and obviously Celtic were really efficient as well. You could actually say that Celtic made more chances in the 2-2 draw at Parkhead, but I think they only had maybe 10 shots on goal or 10 shots on target at the weekend, and they scored with 6 of them. So when Celtic are in that form, it's really difficult for anyone to do anything against it. So got a lot of sympathy for Tilleen when it comes to that.
Yeah, it just goes to show because they met in the Scottish Cup semi-finals, which eventually went to penalties, and Aberdeen are unlucky, unlucky to be beaten there, and Celtic obviously go on to win that trophy. But yeah, it's a kind of tale of two sides, Jenna, because Aberdeen have been high flying and are locked in there at the top on the same points as Celtic in the league, but it started not so bad. Well, it started with a pyro-filled stadium, but it started not so bad. And it took quite a while for Aberdeen to be broken down, but then as soon as the first one went in, so did the rest of them.
Well, definitely. I've said for a while now that, to be honest, the only way you can get some sort of a result from playing Celtic, be it even just a draw or somehow getting 3 points off them, is you cannot let them score within the first 25 minutes. If they don't score within that first 25 minutes, they start to panic a little bit. You can see it in some of their games. If you go back and watch them, like if they're not at least like 1-0 up, 2-0 up by half time, they lack a good bit of composure. They'll come out at half time, they'll end up probably winning it, or at the very minimum, getting a draw against whoever it is that they're playing. But you really need to hold them to account in games. You can't be so blasé about it. I'm not saying Aberdeen were like that, but again, I'm not against changing formulas. Like, I know you were saying, like, if you've got a philosophy at a club, like, fair enough. But sometimes philosophies need to be changed and need to be adapted based on who you're playing. Aberdeen, I don't think they made the right decision for how they played. They saw how well they did at Parkhead, obviously getting that draw against them, then obviously the win against Rangers. That's huge for Aberdeen. If they are being serious title contenders, they should have written the game differently, because theoretically speaking, what was stopping them from potentially chasing the double, if you want to make that argument? Do you know where I'm coming from? Like, if they're serious but trying to be league challengers, should have been thinking about the same for the cup. Because the cup's a one-off game. I mean, look at how many shock results that we've had. I mean, look at that Darvel Aberdeen one. No one would have predicted that, but it happened.
I think the midfield's the main talking point. I
Yeah.
think just having two defensive mids in there and not having a third option. Obviously, McGrath was involved on the team sheet, but he was very close to Sockler in that first half. And I think that's where they were overran. You know, they just
Definitely.
really struggled to get a grip on the game. And again, it goes back to that thing. I think you're right. I think we can all see it as being quite naive and wondering just why they allowed themselves to be so open. But I guess in Tilleen's mind, he might just be thinking this is all part of the longer term strategy, and it might be a bit of short term pain to get that long term sort of gain in terms of having a way of playing. Again, if you play against Celtic or Rangers, you probably do need to adjust how you set up. But again, I suppose it's down to Aberdeen fans whether they think he's done right or wrong there. But yeah, as a neutral, you can definitely see the gaping holes that existed in the middle of that park. And I certainly had a lot of, and I don't say this often or very often, I had a lot of sympathy for Graham Shinney on Saturday, because he was really chasing shadows for the majority of that match.
No, it's quite hard to watch as well. I mean, I don't know if this is me just being bitter or not, but the idea that we almost had a non-Old Firm final, it's something you don't get very often. It's always at least one of them's in it. The thought that it could have potentially been a Motherwell Aberdeen one still hurts me to this day. I say that as if it's been ages, but it's only been like 24 hours, but still, it just hurts, because I don't know about you guys, I'm sick to the death of it just being an Old Firm final for all the cups, or an Old Firm semi, and one of the Old Firm eventually end up winning it. We need some freshness injected into this, and I was hoping I felt like an Aberdeen fan on Saturday night. You know what? I was dying for them to get a result, just for a little bit of difference and shake things up a bit. But
You're a better individual than me, Jenna. I'm quite petty. So
oh no, I am
given that there is a bit of a rivalry between Aberdeen and Hearts, and I think that's engineered from both ends, and it's all down to third place rather than anything else. But I think because of that, there was a little bit of me that was quite, I'm quite glad they've been put in their place a little bit on Saturday. That's me. I'm a petty guy, so that's probably what that is.
Yeah, Ackies were playing at the weekend there in the full time. I was sitting there wondering, how can both teams lose? Not a draw. How can we change the rules of football so both teams can lose and get deducted 9 points for the sheer fact that they exist?
So, you've stolen my line there, Jenna, because I was going to say the same. I was hoping that both Aberdeen and Celtic found a way to be out of the cup, because
it could have been automatically disqualified for the Pyros and Motherwell Rangers final, but there we are.
Yeah, well, the point then came that I was more worried not about who won or lost, but who we'd be winning or losing to if we overcame Motherwell on Sunday. But yeah, before we get into the 6 goals, just kind of on that, Scott, do you think, especially after going to Celtic Park, going 2-0 down and then bringing it back to 2-2, it was a case of, do you know what, let's go balls to the wall because Celtic are going to do the same. And do you know what, in a cup situation, this is the one where you do put all your cards on the table.
Well, this is the thing, so on the surface, it looked like Aberdeen done really well to get a 2-2 draw at Parkhead, right? If you look beyond the surface stats and you look at the little possession they had and the fact that they scored with literally their 2 shots on goal, you're not going to do that very often. Mm-hmm. And I think they received a lot of plaudits for that, when in fact what people really should have been looking at was just how poor in front of goal Celtic were that day. That could have easily been 4 or 5-0 to Celtic at half-time that day as well. Aberdeen, they make a couple of really good positive changes at half-time, and again, they look to do something similar at the weekend, but by that time, the game was already, well and gone, truly gone. So I think there is lessons to learn in terms of how we analyse games of football as well. When you actually compare the patterns of play within the Celtic-Aberdeen League game and the Cup game, there's not a lot of difference in there, apart from Celtic were just more proficient in front of goal. in terms of Aberdeen's performance, it wasn't really that different. They were giving up a lot of possession at Parkhead. They were offering a lot of chances there as well. Only difference being is Celtic didn't take them. So I think that was a result that was maybe in the offing. Maybe all Aberdeen really done in that league game was just kick the can down the road a couple of weeks. They're always due this result against Celtic, given how open they're being. And again, it'll just be quite interesting to see whether Tillene will take anything on board from that, or whether he will just continue to just do what he wants to do and just hope that, again, it gains more positives than negatives.
And Jenna, a couple of stars from the show. To move it on to the team that do make it to the final, Celtic, a couple of great players and people who've had great starts to the season in Dyson Maida and Nicholas Kuhn. Nicholas probably the one that we'll touch on first, because he came in last season for Celtic and had a pretty below average start to life in the green and white hoops. And I think maybe Celtic fans were questioning why he'd even been brought in. I think a few fans were maybe thinking and hoping for a lot more from him, but he's settled down now. Brendan Rodgers has stuck his trust in him, and he's more than repaying the faith.
I mean, but I didn't even know he signed last season, so that says it all. So, like, I thought he came last season, to be honest, but maybe that's just some ignorance from me there. But no, you're right. I mean, he has had a good start to the season. He's been quite involved the past couple of games. To be honest, as I said, I didn't even know he signed last season. He was that much of a ghost. So, I mean, fair play to the boy. He's certainly made up for it now. People are talking about quite a fair bit. Can't really argue with it, Maida as well. I mean, did not get a hat trick on Saturday night. Like, he's been more consistent at Celtic. He's been there for a couple of years now, but it's kind of hard to imagine a Celtic side without Dyson Maida in it. And what the point, it's hard to imagine one without him scoring at least one goal a game. And
yeah, and Scott, that's the thing with Dyson Maida. When he came in and under Ange Postecoglou, he was this workhorse who would run for 90 minutes, and his technical ability wasn't the best. He wasn't really known for his finishing, and that seemed to just be wrapped up by Kyogo every single game. But since Brendan Rodgers has come in, he's adapted to a different role, seems to still be this ridiculous workhorse who can run at 90 miles an hour for 90 minutes, but has also added goals and assists to his game. So he's become a really important asset to Celtic in terms of on the goal scoring front as well.
Yeah, that can sometimes come from the slight change and tweaks in style from manager to manager as well, in terms of some managers like their wide players to keep their width in games and just provide that outlet. Some other managers quite like their wide players to be attacking the back post and making sure that they're falling in and sort of making sure that they're, giving an extra body in the box when balls are coming in as well. I think if you look at what Brendan Rodgers achieved with his wide players during his first spell, it was the most productive James Forrest has ever been for Celtic. Sinclair was always hitting double figures. You also had the likes of Patrick Roberts coming in and making an impression as well. So I think that's something that Rodgers does have a sort of catalogue or a history and sort of achieving. So it's not that huge a shock to see Maida come up with those sorts of numbers now. And again, it's not to say that he wasn't contributing under Ange Postecoglou, but it could just be down to some little tweaks in there between the two managers that's seeing this difference.
Yeah, and we will move on to Sunday then. Celtic would be watching closely to find out who they played in the cup final. And Jenna, you were there at Amden, Motherwell versus Rangers. You were quietly confident before the game, or maybe not so quietly confident?
Not so quietly confident. To be honest, like, usually if I was told, yep, you're facing the Old Firm at Hampden, it's a semi or a final, I would be absolutely scared at my brain, to put it lightly, because I'd be thinking they're absolutely going to destroy us, it's going to be a humiliation, treat this as a payday and just move on. But if we were ever going to beat Rangers at Hampden, it should have been on Sunday. The form that they're in, the mess of their management and their board right now, it was ours for the taking, and we absolutely balled it. So I'm still very bad about it, but well, you can tell, but just one of those things. But inside, I'm still absolutely dumb about it, and you'll see that in a column for the BBC for this week as well. Like, yeah, there will be words said. I don't know if they'll keep it in, but there will be words said. I get edited out Andy Halliday comments, but
we'll start with that then, because more trouble for Rangers, and they go into half time trailing by 1-0, and Philippe Clement probably has 45 minutes to save his job at Ibrox, but it's Andy Halliday, boyhood Rangers fan, who rushes into the box and flies what was a brilliant cross, flies in and gets the final touch. He decides not to celebrate in front of the Rangers fans, and I'll hold my hands up as he did and say, I don't see the kind of I don't see the big deal, because he is an ex-Rangers player. He's obviously a boyhood fan and has kind of always been known to be a Rangers fan. I didn't see the issue with it. Scott, as the kind of neutral of the situation, although he has played for your club, do you think that, do you think more has been made out of this than should have been? Do you think if Motherwell go on to win this game 1-0 and that is the only goal, anyone is even talking about that moment?
I think because of the opposition, there becomes a case of selective outrage amongst neutrals. So I'm not gonna make my position clear in terms of how Motherwell fans feel about it, but I think from a neutral standpoint, I think there is a case of selective outrage because it involves one half of the old firm. And I think Andy Halliday gets quite a bad rap, actually. I really enjoy listening to Andy Halliday, whether it's on Clyde, whether it's doing the off the ball stuff, sort of with Cy Ferry as well. They're always the two I've always found the most engaging from those podcasts. I think he served Rangers well. He served Hearts well. He's also serving Motherwell pretty well just now, up to a point. I get it. I get that the fans will want to see the same emotion from the players as they have themselves from that moment. But what I would probably say is that there's probably been times, whether it be Louis Malt coming back to Motherwell, whether it be David Clarkson coming back with his Dundee team and scoring and doing something similar, and there not being an issue from that. So I think it's one of those things where I think we all do get caught up in the moment, and it's because it's quite an emotive topic, especially with it being a semi-final fixture. But for me, he shows the desire that you want from a player to get in the box and actually score. What he does after that is probably not really that big a deal, but again, it actually comes away from being about what Motherwell fans want, which is really the only opinion that really matters in this. It becomes more of another sort of petty point scoring exercise between Rangers and Celtic fans. I actually saw one Celtic podcast refer to it as woke. I mean, that term just gets overused these days anyway, but when you apply the term woke to a celebration or lack thereof, God knows, but I just let these people get on with it. For me, he's doing nothing wrong. If he didn't have a desire to do well against his former team and his boyhood team, he wouldn't have found himself in the box in the first place. So I think he's acted professionally. But again, I can understand from an emotive point of view why Motherwell fans would maybe feel that they would have wanted him to have maybe embraced that moment a little bit more.
Yeah, you said when we talked about it earlier that in the moment you obviously didn't notice because you were far too busy celebrating. But having seen it back, where do you stand?
Where I stand is not friendly to say on YouTube without getting demonetised. No, but like, to be honest, see, the way I say it is, right, and I'm probably going to call the hypocrite for this. I don't care. Hit me with your abuse. I do not care in the slightest. Louis Moult came back with Dundee United. Now, he was at Motherwell. He left, went down south, did a bit down there, came back, then left. Went to United, came back, he scored. We all knew it was going to happen. It was written in the stars. Moult was absolutely determined to score that night. But he did in fact celebrate, because he went up to Dundee United fans and went like that to them, because they'd been giving him pelters for weeks that he wasn't good enough anymore. He celebrated. Now, fair enough, a bit of a protest celebration at the end of the day, but he still acknowledged the fact that he scored. David Turnbull went to Celtic. He came to Fir Park and he scored at Fir Park. And did he celebrate? No, he didn't, right? And that's fair enough. That's his choice. But realistically speaking, are you going to behave like that every single time you play against your former team? I think that's just daft. The first time you meet them again, fair enough. But end of the day, Halliday left Rangers years ago. He was at Hearts for a good while as well. See, if you were playing Hearts and he'd done that because he just left them in January, fair enough. I'd be like, you know what? Fair enough. But he left Rangers years. This boyhood club nonsense, I don't care. When did it? You're a Mull player.
There is an element of damned if you do, damned if you don't with this, eh? Like, regardless of what decision he makes yesterday, he's going to get abuse from some quarters. And he's probably, this is maybe harsh to say, but he's maybe running the numbers game and thinking it's better to get the ire of a few thousand Motherwell fans than get the ire of what can be a very vocal Rangers supporter.
Vocal and toxic, so yeah.
Oh, you can call your own fans toxic if you want, Alex. I wasn't going to go. To that, but yeah, I do think there's always an element of that, especially in today's society. You know, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Sometimes.
No,
I've got
he's
sympathy
not.
for
I'm
him.
he's not. Can I just say, if he was a retired player making these comments on like Super Scoreboard or something like that and hadn't actually been playing the game, I'd be like, fair enough, he just doesn't want to annoy the Rangers fans because there's millions of them and there's about 12 of us, right? Fair enough. But at the end of the day, he's an active Mull player. He was on that pitch wearing a Clark Amber jersey. No, a red, white and blue one. Says Halliday in the back, Mull at the front, Paycare, whatever, or G4 Claims, whatever the bloody sponsor is now, right? There's no reason for him not to celebrate our only goal at Hampden for 6 years in a cup semi-final. That is utter
just to kind of give
with
you
regards to the comments that he makes on Clyde, because I know he does.
Yeah,
he does tend to refer to Rangers as the collective we. I think sometimes. I think, to be fair to him, he signs a contract with Motherwell or in the past with Hearts, and obviously this will be something that would be
the club he plays
negotiated. I think you need to take that up with Motherwell. Like they're allowing him on it. They've obviously agreed to that when they've been signing terms with him. He's technically not doing anything wrong in that respect. Although, again, I get it that it can sound as if he's not quite connected to your club when he's talking about another team that you're competing with in that league. But I think all Andy Halliday's trying to do is just 40. I think he knows his time's coming to an end in terms of being a full-time pro, and he's just trying to carve a pathway into either being a full-time pundit or something along those terms, and he's just...
And that's fine.
Try to see that right,
but... all he wants. But there's no need to...
Sorry, Jenna. Sorry, just to take this a kind of question for you then. I'm going to take it to 2 points, but first of all, do you then foresee an issue with him being this kind of Rangers man on the likes of Clyde One?
I don't have an issue with him sharing his opinions and stories from when he was a Rangers player. There's nothing wrong with that.
But what Scott was saying there was... often he would refer to Rangers as we, even though he is a Motherwell player. Is that an issue for you?
It depends on the context. See if he's talking about times when he was directly at Rangers. So, like, say for example, he's talking about a game. Now, this is completely fictional here, right? Say for example, he's talking about maybe in a wee game in Europe or something like that. It was when we travelled over. Fair enough, because he was Rangers at that point. See if he was to turn round and talk about like the latest Old Firm game or something like that. It goes, Celtic absolutely scudded us. Sorry, no, they didn't. They didn't beat Mull in that game. As soon as you sign for us, your we, us and them has to be about the club you're playing for. I do not care in the slightest about who he supports. Well, he grew up 2 steps away from government. Who cares? Honestly, who cares? Only what? He's been a lifelong Celtic fan all his days. But guaranteed, see if he scored against them, he'd probably celebrate. Played for St Johnstone. Celebrated against them and he scored against them playing for us. I'm pretty sure he scored against us and celebrated and all. That's loyalty thing. First time you play your L team, fair enough. But see years after you've left them, get that absolutely in the bin. If you see if I'm dying to see if next time you play Hearts and see if he scores, I'm dying to see what he does. I'm dying to see this.
Does it then become a kind of, because this is something that's become, I mean, it's quite funny to me, in all honesty, but
I know it's a little
hilarity of it.
I don't even care. This is the most passionate you'll see me on this podcast.
If Andy Halliday then goes to, or when Rangers come to Fir Park later in the season, and Andy Halliday scores again, he is now in a very awkward.
He has to celebrate. He has to, because see if he doesn't, it's a joke. There's been things that have happened over the past couple of months that I've let slide and not commented on because just things are open to interpretation, right? There's videos that the club put out when we bet Rangers at Ibrox, and you can see Andy Halliday walking down the team tunnel. He looks absolutely raging. His team just won 2-1. Well, sorry, the team he plays for just won 2-1.
Okay, right.
That's weird, but you let it go. Plays against Hearts. No Hearts, Hibs even. Scores and does the Morelos thing. Well, that's his normal celebration against Hibs. You sure about that? Like, it's just just wee things like that, and I'm like, if you're that desperate to go back to him, go to Govan and plead on your hands and knees. End of the day, one of our players. So fucking act like one.
Okay, right. Let's let's move on. I was kind of hoping to have that wrapped up maybe quicker, but
Apologies,
yeah,
but
some good talking points. Well, right from there then, yeah, Motherwell probably deserved to go in to halftime in the lead, but one of a couple of things said from our good friend Gogsy is that they have to start the second half complacently. No room for complacency, sorry, and they have to start the second half strong, and that's not what they do. I mean, 5 minutes within the start of the second half, Scott, the game is level from Cyril Dessers, who has had more than his fair share of tough times at the moment.
Yeah, I think to be fair to Motherwell, I didn't actually notice Motherwell doing anything differently from first to the start of that second half. I think what happens is Rangers just step up, just the tempo of their passing just a little bit, which creates that opening for the first goal. But I don't think Motherwell really done anything wrong per se. Again, it's always that subconscious thing of being a goal in front against one half of the old firm. Even if your manager is pleading with you not to do it. As a team, as a collective, you can subconsciously start to retreat 5-10 yards in the park. You can start to step off a little bit in tackles and that as well. And we never really got the opportunity to see if that was something that was going to happen with Motherwell because Rangers scored so early on in the second half. But for me, I didn't see any immediate problems with how Motherwell started. It was more a case of Rangers had clearly been told that they were moving the ball too slowly in the first half. And it was one of those rare occasions where Barron actually runs beyond the front line and actually is able to pull the ball back. So I think it's more a case of Rangers actually doing something right rather than Motherwell doing something wrong.
And why do you think it's taken then, Scott? I'm just going to stay with you on that one. Why do you think it's taken to the second half for that kind of reaction to kick in? Because it's something which is asked quite a lot of, and I mean, it does happen quite a lot, and not just with Rangers, quite a few teams, that it takes a goal against for the urgency of the players to kind of kick in and go, actually, we need to do something about this.
Well, I think just sticking with Rangers in terms of how it's affecting them, I think their recruitment was poor in the summer. I think they've signed a lot of neat and tidy footballers who are fine at maybe, just interchanging the ball and sort of playing at a relaxed pace and being quite good technical players when the ball's at their feet. But I don't see enough sort of physicality and pace in that Rangers side, and that is why they are playing a lot of games at that tempo, and it's why they're struggling up to this point this season. You can see that there's an individuals like Czerny and even Jeffy in that to a certain point. They're not bad players per se, but there needs to be a better balance within that squad, and there's not enough pace in the wide areas, and there's not enough sort of physicality coming through the middle of the park either. And then you've got the issue up front where Dessers isn't a bad player, but again, is he someone that should be leading the line for Rangers week in, week out? Probably not. And that's where the issue comes from. It's recruitment, and it's recruiting all these players who play a certain way and within a certain style. And the problem is Rangers fans won't call for that. They won't accept that, They won't accept playing at that tempo, especially when they've seen what Celtic have done under Postecoglou and now Rodgers over a sort of 3 or 4 year spell. They'll be looking at that and saying, look at how far off it we are. Like, again, Czerny, Barami, and that, they're not bad players. Tom Lawrence, again, not a bad player, but just a neat and tidy footballer. He's never see him, getting a game by the scruff of the neck and sort of seeing Rangers through a match in the same way that you would see somebody like McGregor or Hatate do for the centre at Celtic. And that is their biggest issue at Rangers. And they're going to continue having these problems, and it's not going to go away with the removal of a manager. They're going to need to have a significant turnaround in playing personnel again to fix this problem. It isn't just down to Clement, although he is a part of the issue. It started with Michael Beale. Clement's came in and not fixed it. In fact, you could make an argument to say he's made the situation worse. And now you're not just looking at changing him. You would need to get rid of a lot of those players as well if Rangers want to get back to where they think they should be.
It's kind of like Hibs almost. It's the same argument for them when you really think about it.
Yeah. You start again. It's that similar thing of I've been here 9-10 years. I'll be here longer than this manager, and they know it. And again, I'm I think players have too much pride to down tools. I'm sure there's a couple of exceptions within world football where a team has went out and literally just said, I'm wanting him sacked. But I think a lot of it comes through subconscious again, where people start to get quite relaxed about their own position. They know that the manager's got a limited shelf life. And again, all you have to do to lose a game of football, especially in Scotland where it is competitive, is you just have to lose 5% of your usual performance in that. And if enough players do that in a game, this is where you see results like the Kilmarnock and Aberdeen ones against Rangers recently. And this is something that I think Clement needs to needs to get used to. I think he signed a lot of players that he felt technically would be enough to see him win games, but he hasn't addressed the issue regarding physicality and lack of pace within the team, which teams like Motherwell, St Mirren and Kilmarnock can bridge the gap on by having players that can go box to box, having physical players, having athletic players, and that's a situation that Rangers need to address over the next couple of windows, whether it's Clement or not.
Yeah, and I'll take it on to that point then, Jenna, because I know where most of, if not all, Rangers fans sit in terms of Clement. I mean, we do come out and Bayrami gets the goal, which puts us ahead, a nice break, a nice move from Cherney, who was probably man of the match. But yeah, Rangers do go ahead, win it, and are now in the cup final next month. But I don't think papering over the cracks is fair, because it's all visible, and you can see there are many issues at Rangers. But do you think that it's a matter of when, not if, for Clement leaving, or do you think it's a kind of time to suck it up? And as Scott says, for Hibs, it's a chance for Rangers to kind of go, right, we need to get out of this vicious cycle of sack a manager, start really well under the new manager, think, yeah, this guy's best thing since sliced bread, and then drop off and go, this guy's horrendous, why did we even get him in the first place? I told you all he was rotten, and just keep doing that and again and again. Do you think Clement has to kind of stay on and Rangers board need to make a point, especially to some of the players as well as the fans, or do you think it's a time for a fresh face?
About both, to be honest, in a weird way. I mean, I've just went on the BBC there just to see who the next couple of games are. Think of it this way, right? They've got Olympiacos away, Hearts at home, Dundee United at home, Nice away, St Johnstone at home. No, sorry, St Johnstone away even. Kelly at home on the 4th of December. County will be in the 8th. Spurs at home, which obviously the return of Ange, and then the League Cup on the 15th. Those are some big challenges for Rangers. Ideally, you want to give Clement the chance to get to the League Cup and play that out. But if he's able to get some results in Europe, that'll bide his time. But domestic form, if they're not winning at least about 80% of those games, he's gone. At the very latest, he'll get the League Cup final. But depending on how the league form goes, I can see him going before that. I mean, playing like Olympiacos and Spurs, you expect Rangers to lose that now. Rangers of 2-3 years ago, when Gerrard was still there, I'd have actually fancied their chances. But Rangers are a shell of a team that they used to be. That's what makes bloody Sundays bad and painful for Motherwell, was they're not the team they used to be.
And Scott, just kind of on that point, Clement has maybe got a few chances now to kind of save his Rangers career, and Sunday will have done him a little bit of good. But do you think, obviously Jenna's saying there's a lot of big games in there, but being 9 points behind already, surely it doesn't matter if you win 9 out of 10, because that one that you drop points in is going to be the one that's probably going to get your head chopped off.
Yeah, he is now in that situation where it's just a case of kicking the can down the road. It's a case of when rather than if in terms of his position. I think he's quite fortunate that because of all the unrest at boardroom level in terms of positions not being filled that have been left vacant from months ago, there probably is a lack of leadership above him just now, which means that no one's really willing to take that decision. But I think, you talked about this before we started recording this evening, Alex, around the Tavernier decision. You can now see that there is an element of wanting to appease fans in some of his decision making. And I think once you do that, the fans can smell blood, especially at a club as big as Rangers, and I think the players do as well. And I think it is just a matter of time for him. I honestly thought when he got the gig last year, I noticed how Rangers played under him, and although they weren't great to watch, I felt like he was doing a good job of getting the best out of a limited squad that he'd inherited. And I actually thought that if the recruitment had been right, I was quite confident he could have put a bit of a challenge in on Celtic this season. But how wrong was I? Like, the recruitment was so bad, so poor. I mean, Connor Barron's a decent player, but 30, 20 years ago, Connor Barron would have been signed as a backup player. But he has become almost a linchpin in that midfield because of how poor or average the players are round about him. And I think that's a good way of gauging how far Rangers have fallen. And not just fallen from the glory days of 20, 30 years ago, but possibly even, I mean, this is probably the poorest Rangers team I've seen. So they had issues when they had Mark Warburton there, but they were still a fairly talented team to watch at times. They would still be quite good on the eye. This team are turgid. Like, this is a really rotten Rangers team, and I think it will just be again just a matter of when rather than if for them, because I can't see them turning it round or having enough time to turn it round. You really need a couple of transfer windows at least to be able to address the imbalance they've got within that squad. And even then, they're that far off the pace, not just with Celtic, but with Aberdeen currently, that I think the powers that be will make that decision. They might wait until after the cup final. They might decide to let someone else come in with a bit of a sort of clean slate. I don't think they'd want to bring someone in and for them maybe in their first 2 or 3 games to lose a cup final, because again, that puts them on the back foot straight away. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see a decision made end of December, maybe start of January, to allow someone new to come in and maybe try and clear the decks in terms of personnel.
Just to kind of tidy up then, Jenna, St Johnstone, Ross County and Hibs, the next 3 for Motherwell. Kind of mixed form. I think it's last 6 games, 3 wins, 3 losses. Is it, a chance to take the positives from Sunday for Stuart Kettlewell, or will he, kind of be kicking himself, especially with some of the decisions? Because I've seen a lot of people say that the subs let you down.
Oh, they did. There's no doubt about it, they did. The fact that Moses was never brought on, absolute farce. That boy, Jar, I think you pronounce his name is, he is not a football player. Zach Robinson, he is not a football player. I don't know why he still insists on using Robinson, but I've seen him being dropped to the bench. Like, thank Christ for that. But we just weren't good enough, and the subs we used actually made the game worse for us somehow, which was the exact opposite reason why you make a substitute. But I think it's just one of those ones where you just take it on the chin, try and move on. I'll be as better as I can be for the next 2 weeks, milking absolutely everything out of this. But St Johnstone, must-win game. Habs can maybe pull a draw out of that. County, must-win game. What I would say, but just before again things get clipped and all that, I would just be just as bitter about Andy Halliday if he had played for Celtic, if he'd played for Hearts. Well, in fact, no, he didn't play for Hearts, but you know what I mean. If the incident had happened against Hearts, if it was Dundee United, Hamilton, you name it, I'd still be as bitter about it. It's not an anti-Rangers thing. It's just a case of just screw the head and actually act like a Motherwell player and not like a die-hard Rangers fan when you're on the pitch, please. I would have the pitch, fair enough, but just when you're on the pitch, just be a Motherwell player, please. It's not asking for much, is it?
I think that's Goggsy's position on open goal cemented now for the next few years. I don't know if Jenna's going to.
Oh yeah, I'm never getting invited. Goggsy's the PR friendly Motherwell fan.
I think that invite will get lost in the post.
Goggsy's everyone's favourite Motherwell fan. I'm everyone's least favourite one for a reason.
Well, we will wrap it up there then. Another week or weekend of Scottish football is over. Thank you very much, Scott and Jenna, for joining me. Some great moments for some teams and some not so great moments for others. Aberdeen finally lose under Jimmy Tulline, and Andy Halliday only got to celebrate off of the pitch. Thank you very much for watching.